He ruined our rehearsal dinner just because I was texting my ex behind his back for a few months. You know what's crazy? 3 weeks ago, I thought I had everything figured out. And now everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster just because I was talking to my ex. I'm 28. My name's Harper. And honestly, I'm so tired of people acting like I committed some unforgivable crime when all I did was have conversations with someone who actually listened to me. My fiancé, Ethan, decided to completely lose his mind and ruin our rehearsal dinner because he found some text messages, and now everyone's taking his side like he's some innocent victim. But you want to know the truth? He brought this on himself by being the most boring, predictable guy on the planet. We'd been together for 3 years, and honestly, the excitement died after like 6 months. Don't get me wrong, Ethan checked all the boxes my parents cared about. He had a stable career, came from a good family, never caused any drama or embarrassment. My dad loved him because Ethan would just nod along with whatever anyone said, never challenged anyone's opinions, basically acted like the perfect little yes man. My mom was constantly going on about how lucky I was to find someone so reliable and responsible. But here's what nobody understood. Reliable and responsible doesn't mean exciting or passionate or even interesting. Ethan's idea of a fun Saturday night was ordering pizza and watching whatever Netflix recommended. He proposed in our living room in Willow Creek after we finished eating Thai takeout. Didn't even bother to make it special or memorable. Just pulled out a ring and asked if I wanted to get married. Real romantic, right? Meanwhile, my friends were getting these elaborate proposals with photographers and surprise trips and flash mobs. But I said yes because, honestly, what else was I going to do? I was 25. All my friends were getting engaged, and Ethan seemed safe. My parents were thrilled because his family had money, and he'd never embarrass us at social events in Willow Creek. The wedding planning started immediately, and it was honestly exhausting. My mom took over most of it, which was fine by me because I had better things to do with my time, but every conversation became about flower arrangements and catering menus and seating charts. Ethan would just sit there during these planning sessions, agreeing with whatever my mom suggested, never having any opinions of his own. It was like planning a wedding with a cardboard cutout. That's when my mind started wandering back to Jasper. Jasper was my ex from college in River Hollow. We dated for almost 2 years, and honestly, those were some of the best years of my life. He was everything Ethan wasn't: spontaneous, exciting, unpredictable. With Jasper, every day felt like an adventure. He'd show up at my apartment at midnight just to drive somewhere and watch the sunrise. He'd plan surprise weekend trips without telling me where we were going until we got there. Being with him felt electric in a way that being with Ethan never did. Sure, Jasper wasn't as financially stable as Ethan, and my parents thought he was too impulsive and irresponsible, but when I was with Jasper, I felt alive. With Ethan, I felt like I was slowly dying of boredom. When Jasper reached out 6 months ago with just a simple, "Hey, thinking about you," text, I almost didn't respond, but then I thought, what's the harm in catching up with an old friend? We started texting occasionally, nothing serious at first, just reminiscing about college in River Hollow and talking about our lives. It felt so good to have someone ask how I was doing and actually care about the answer. Ethan had gotten so comfortable in our relationship that he barely listened when I talked about my day at work or told him about things that were bothering me. The thing about Jasper is that he actually paid attention to me, like real, genuine attention. When I told him I was stressed about work stuff, he didn't just grunt and change the subject like Ethan always did. He'd ask follow-up questions, remember details from our previous conversations, actually engage with what I was telling him. Meanwhile, Ethan couldn't even remember what department I worked in half the time. Jasper and I started meeting up for coffee about 4 months ago, and I know how that sounds, but it was completely innocent at first. We'd meet at this cute little place in downtown Willow Creek during my lunch breaks and just talk about everything: our jobs, our goals, what we wanted out of life. It was so refreshing to have deep conversations again because Ethan and I never talked about anything meaningful anymore. Our conversations were all logistics: whose turn to take out the trash, what we needed from the store, whether his mom was coming for dinner Sunday. With Jasper, we talked about books and movies and places we wanted to travel and childhood memories. He made me remember who I used to be before I became half of this boring couple. I started looking forward to these coffee meetings more than I looked forward to seeing my own fiancé, which probably should have been a red flag, but honestly, I just figured it meant I needed more intellectual stimulation in my life. It's not like I was doing anything wrong by having a friend who understood me and could hold an actual conversation. The talks gradually became more personal and intimate. Jasper told me he'd never really gotten over me, that he'd made a huge mistake letting me go back in college. He said he'd been thinking about reaching out for years, but didn't want to mess up my happiness. But then he said he could tell from my social media that something was missing in my relationship with Ethan. And you know what? He wasn't wrong. I was posting all these perfect couple photos, trying to convince everyone, including myself, that we were happy, but they felt so forced and fake. Ethan and I looked good together on paper, but there was zero real chemistry or passion anymore. Jasper could see right through all my pretending, and it felt incredible to have someone who really knew the real me instead of just the version I was performing for everyone else. I started staying late at my job sometimes just so I could text Jasper without Ethan asking annoying questions about who I was talking to. Not because I was hiding anything terrible, but because Ethan got all weird and possessive whenever I mentioned having lunch with male coworkers or anything like that. He'd make these passive-aggressive comments and give me guilt trips about spending time with other men. So I knew he'd completely overreact about Jasper, even though we were just friends catching up. It was easier to keep the friendship private than deal with Ethan's insecurity and jealousy over absolutely nothing. Jasper understood me in ways Ethan never bothered to try. When I told Jasper about my dreams of maybe traveling more or taking some risks in life, he encouraged me and got excited about my ideas. When I mentioned wanting more adventure to Ethan, he immediately started lecturing me about being responsible and saving money for our future house and retirement. See the difference? Jasper believed in me and wanted me to be happy, while Ethan just wanted to keep me trapped in his safe little boring bubble where nothing interesting ever happened. About 3 months ago, everything changed between Jasper and me. We were having coffee, and he reached across the table and took my hand, just for a second, but it sent electricity through my entire body. I hadn't felt that kind of spark or excitement with Ethan in over a year. Jasper looked me straight in the eyes and said he couldn't stop thinking about me, that he'd never stopped loving me even after all these years apart. I should have pulled my hand away, should have reminded him that I was engaged and planning a wedding. But instead, I just sat there, feeling more alive and desired than I had in months. That's when I realized how dead inside my relationship with Ethan had made me feel. Look, I'm not proud of what happened next, but I'm also not going to pretend I didn't enjoy every single second of it. Jasper and I started meeting more frequently, sometimes twice a week. I told Ethan I had more work events and girls' nights, and honestly, he didn't even seem to care enough to ask for details or want to come along. Sometimes he'd just nod and go back to whatever stupid game he was playing on his phone, which basically tells you everything you need to know about how checked out he was from our relationship. Meanwhile, Jasper would text me good morning every single day and ask how I slept. He'd send me funny memes during work that actually made me laugh. And he remembered little things I mentioned in passing conversations. When I said I was craving these specific cookies from a bakery across Willow Creek, he showed up at my office the next day with a whole box of them. When was the last time Ethan did something thoughtful and romantic like that? I honestly can't even remember because he'd completely stopped putting in any effort once he knew I wasn't going anywhere. The physical stuff started gradually and naturally. Jasper would hug me a little longer when we said goodbye or put his hand on my back when we were walking somewhere together. It felt so right and natural, like we were just picking up where we left off in college when we were actually happy and passionate about each other. 3 months ago, we were sitting in his car after coffee because it was raining, and we were just talking and laughing about old times. And then, suddenly, we were kissing. And oh my God, it was like coming back to life after being dead for 3 years. I'd completely forgotten what it felt like to be wanted and desired like that. To have someone look at me like I was the most beautiful and fascinating woman in the world. With Ethan, intimacy had become this scheduled, predictable, boring routine that felt more like a chore than anything passionate or exciting. But with Jasper, everything felt spontaneous and electric and alive. I know, technically it was cheating, but it didn't feel like cheating because there was no real relationship left to cheat on. It felt like I was finally being true to myself and my needs for the first time in years instead of just going through the motions of this fake engagement. We started meeting at his apartment in River Hollow instead of public places where people might see us and ask questions. I'd tell Ethan I was working late or meeting girlfriends for dinner. And I'd spend hours with Jasper, just talking and reconnecting and remembering what it felt like to be myself again. Yes, we were physical, but it was about so much more than that. Jasper made me feel like the confident, interesting, desirable woman I used to be before I got trapped in this suffocating relationship where I felt invisible and unappreciated. For the first time in months, I was actually excited about something. I'd wake up looking forward to Jasper's good morning texts, planning what I'd wear when I saw him, thinking about our conversations throughout the day. Meanwhile, Ethan and I were basically just roommates who occasionally talked about wedding logistics and bill payments. The worst part was everyone constantly telling me how lucky I was and how perfect Ethan was for me. My parents never stopped going on about what a good choice I'd made, how stable and reliable he was, how our kids would be so fortunate to have him as a father. But they didn't see what I saw every single day. How he'd shut down whenever I tried to have a real conversation about anything important. How he never showed genuine interest in my thoughts or feelings or dreams. How he just expected me to be satisfied with the absolute bare minimum effort. Jasper actually wanted to know what I thought about things. He valued my opinions and made me feel smart and interesting and worth listening to. With Ethan, I felt like just another item on his boring to-do list that he could check off and ignore. The texting with Jasper became constant throughout the day. We'd message each other from the moment we woke up until we went to sleep. He'd send me photos of random things that reminded him of me, and I'd share details about my day that I never bothered telling Ethan because Ethan never cared enough to ask follow-up questions or remember what I told him. Jasper knew more about my daily life and what was actually going on with me than my own fiancé did. And that's because he actually cared enough to pay attention and be present when I was talking. I wasn't planning to leave Ethan or blow up my entire life or anything that dramatic and complicated. I just needed something that made me feel alive and appreciated while I figured out how to either fix my relationship or get through this wedding that was already planned and paid for. 2 months ago, things started getting more complicated when Jasper began talking about us having a real future together. He said he'd never stopped regretting letting me go in college and that watching me get engaged to someone else was pure torture for him. He started asking if I was really, truly happy with Ethan, if I could honestly see myself spending the rest of my life in such a boring, passionless relationship where I felt unheard and unappreciated. And honestly, when he put it like that, I started questioning everything I thought I wanted. Was I really going to marry someone just because he was safe and stable and my parents approved? What about passion and excitement and feeling truly understood and desired by your partner? What about feeling alive instead of just going through the motions? Jasper made me realize that I'd been settling for way less than I deserved my entire adult life. But I also wasn't ready to completely blow up everything I'd built. The wedding was already planned. Deposits were paid. Invitations had been sent out months ago. Breaking up with Ethan would mean disappointing my parents, dealing with all the family drama and embarrassing questions, having to start completely over at 28. It felt overwhelming and terrifying and honestly kind of impossible to even imagine. So I kept both relationships going, thinking I could figure it out after the wedding somehow. Maybe Ethan and I would grow closer once we were actually married and settled. Or maybe I'd find a way to end things with Jasper without destroying everything I'd worked to build with Ethan and our families. Then Ethan started getting suspicious and weird about everything. He began asking way too many questions about where I was going and who I was spending time with. He'd make these passive-aggressive comments about how I seemed distracted lately or how I was always on my phone texting someone. I told him he was being paranoid and controlling, that I needed space to breathe and have my own friendships and social life, which was completely true. He was being possessive and jealous for no good reason that he could prove. Well, okay, maybe there was a reason, but he didn't actually know that. So his behavior was still unreasonable and suffocating. His constant suspicion and questioning made me feel defensive and annoyed, and we started fighting way more often than we ever had before. He'd accuse me of being secretive and distant, and I'd turn it around on him for not trusting me and being insecure about my friendships. These fights actually made me feel more justified about spending time with Jasper because they proved how incompatible Ethan and I really were as people. Jasper never questioned my independence or made me feel guilty for having other relationships and interests outside of him. The worst fight happened 3 weeks before our wedding. Ethan found a receipt in my car from this restaurant in downtown Willow Creek and started interrogating me about when I'd been there because I told him I was working late that night and grabbed something quick near the office. I said I'd met a coworker for dinner after staying late to finish a project, but he kept pushing for more details like some kind of detective. He wanted to know which coworker, why I hadn't mentioned it before, why I hadn't invited him to come along, why I'd never talked about being friends with this person. His interrogation made me absolutely furious because I'm not his property, and I shouldn't have to account for every single minute of my day like I'm some kind of prisoner. That's when I really lost it and told him he was being controlling and insecure. That this possessive behavior was exactly why our relationship felt so suffocating and why I couldn't talk to him about anything. 3 days before our rehearsal dinner, I made what turned out to be a huge mistake. I'd been texting Jasper while Ethan was in the shower getting ready for work. And when he came out, I quickly put my phone face down on the nightstand without thinking to close the message thread completely. The next morning, when I went downstairs to make us coffee, Ethan's phone was dead, so he grabbed mine to check the weather like he'd done a million times before. That's when he saw everything. Months and months of conversations between Jasper and me. I came back upstairs with our coffee and found him sitting on our bed in our Willow Creek apartment, holding my phone, looking like someone had just told him his entire family had died in a car accident. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at the screen, scrolling through message after message after message. I tried to grab the phone away from him, but he pulled it back and kept reading with this horrible expression on his face. The silence in that room felt like it was going to kill me. When he finally looked up at me, his expression was completely blank and empty. He said my name like it was a question, like he wasn't sure who I was anymore or if he'd ever really known me at all. Then he started reading some of the messages out loud in this weird, flat voice. The ones where Jasper told me he loved me and missed me. Where I said I thought about him constantly, where we made plans to meet up at his apartment. Hearing those private, intimate conversations spoken in Ethan's voice felt completely violating and wrong, like he was deliberately trying to hurt me by making something beautiful sound dirty and shameful. I tried to explain that it wasn't what it looked like, that Jasper and I were just old friends catching up and reconnecting. That some of the messages were being taken completely out of context. But Ethan kept scrolling and finding more evidence that made my explanations sound ridiculous and hollow. Messages about meeting at Jasper's place. Conversations about how bored and unhappy I was in my relationship. Detailed plans we'd made to see each other while Ethan was at work. I could see him putting all the pieces together in real time. And I knew there was no way to spin this that would make it look innocent or harmless. So I decided to go on the offensive instead of just standing there letting him attack me. I told Ethan that this was exactly why I hadn't felt comfortable talking to him about my friendships, because he was controlling and possessive and couldn't handle me having relationships with other people, especially men. I said that if he'd been paying more attention to our relationship instead of taking me completely for granted, maybe I wouldn't have needed to find emotional support and understanding elsewhere. I reminded him of all the times he'd dismissed my feelings or ignored me when I tried to talk to him about problems in our relationship that were making me unhappy. His reaction was definitely not what I expected at all. Instead of yelling or getting defensive or angry like I thought he would, he just looked sad and tired and defeated. He asked how long it had been going on. And when I hesitated because I didn't want to make things worse, he said he could just scroll through all the messages himself if I preferred to let him figure it out on his own. So I told him about 6 months, but I made sure to emphasize that it was mostly just talking and emotional connection, that nothing really serious or relationship ending had happened between us, which was technically true in my mind. Jasper and I hadn't slept together or done anything that I considered completely crossing the line into unforgivable territory. But then Ethan asked if I'd been physical with Jasper at all, and I couldn't exactly lie when he was literally holding months of evidence in his hands. I tried to minimize it as much as possible, said it was just a few kisses here and there, that it didn't mean anything serious or threaten our relationship. But then he found the messages where Jasper and I talked about our chemistry and how much we'd missed touching each other and being close. That's when Ethan finally completely lost his mind. He threw my phone across the room, and it shattered against the wall into like a million pieces. He said he couldn't believe he'd been planning to spend his entire life with someone who could lie to his face for months while carrying on with another man behind his back. He said he felt like a complete idiot for trusting me, for believing I was the person he thought he was marrying. That's when I really let him have it and told him exactly what I thought about his role in all this mess.